Good evening, and I'd like to call to order this Planning Committee meeting for the town of Saugeen Shores. Our first item on the agenda is additions, deletions, or amendments, and we have nothing there. The next item is a declaration of pecuniary interest, and I'll remind every member of your responsibility. If you have a pecuniary interest, you can declare it now or when it arises on the agenda. Nothing. And then the next item on the agenda is adoption of minutes. December the 18th, and it's been moved by Vice Deputy Mayor Huber, seconded by Councillor Minaj, that the Planning Committee minutes of dated December the 18th, 2017 are hereby approved as circulated. Any errors or omissions? All in favor? Carried. So this evening we have no public meetings, and we have no delegations. We have 5 reports. And the first one is for Terry and Susan Hartwick for 246 Saugeen Beach Road, and I'll turn it over to our planner, Tessa, to give us a report and a recommendation.
Great. So you got the map there and just the general location information. So this is a zoning amendment with a related consent file. So, as mentioned, the purpose of this meeting is to make a recommendation, and we've reviewed all the comments received and the land use policies in making that recommendation. So we have received a complete application, it's been circulated, had the consultation on December, it was circulated to the public, and we had the meeting on December 18th. Yeah, no worries. So just to give a recap of this application, so this is a proposal to rezone the subject lands in order to facilitate 2 lot additions, and as a result of these lot additions, there would be 2 dwelling units on 1 lot. So just the site plan gives a little bit better picture of what's happening. So the zoning change would be for the property at 246 Saugeen Beach Road and 244. So these properties here. This property is not subject to any zoning change. It's only this one here. Once they've merged together, and so this will, and just to remind the committee that this portion is being added to 248. And so through the 2 lot additions, it is proposed that the lands be rezoned in order to allow the 2 dwelling units, so the existing cabin and the existing house, on the merged property of 244. The zoning will allow for the second dwelling as it exists on the passing of this bylaw. So by that we mean that we're recognizing that footprint and that dwelling as it exists, and the way we've worded the bylaw as proposed is that it would be subject to the renovation provisions of legal nonconforming buildings for renovations and necessary works, but it wouldn't be permitted to have any sort of additions or enlargements or any added intensity of use. So just what's existing as it exists today, with allowing renovations and upgrades as necessary. The bylaw would also recognize the reduced interior side yard setback as existing. So in terms of, we are recommending that the zoning be approved and that council adopt the draft bylaw as prepared. In terms of the comments that we received, we didn't receive any objections from any of the circulated agencies or the public, and nothing new has come up since the public meeting. And in response to the public meeting held, there's no restrictions in terms of use, in terms of family use versus rental, because it was noted that these would be difficult to enforce, but we are limiting the intensity of use to what currently exists on these 2 properties, but 1 property once they've merged. Subject capacity will be evaluated as a condition of consent. As we said, there will be no new separate servicing. All the servicing will be extended from the house at 244. So in terms of this application, it's our understanding that The application is consistent with the PPS. It upholds the objectives of the official plan and represents good land use planning. And so this situation, we believe, would be an improvement on the existing one. So we are recommending approval at this time. Thanks.
Thank you, Tessa. And the recommendation is further to the statutory public meeting held December the 18th, 2017, where the application was presented and council members were provided an opportunity to ask questions for clarification. Therefore, staff recommend that zoning bylaw amendment Z-74-17.44 be approved, and that council of the town of Saugeen Shores adopts the draft bylaw attached. Comments, questions? Mike Myatt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be supporting this application, and I did meet with Mrs. Hartwig, and I did walk the property. I just asked the question about the width of the driveway and access to the back cottage, and I think this is, correcting a situation with landlocked piece that allows them to use that cottage, which I think is a good thing. There's one line in the report I just wanted to have clarified, and no objections provided that. All servicing septic and driveways shall be confirmed to be located in separate parcels. Could you just explain that, what that wording means about located in separate parcels? Like the parking, I understand septic and servicing, but it's the parking I was questioning. What do you mean by located on separate parcels?
So the parking for, in this case, it would be, the parking would be on that for both cottages. I think those were the town comments, so I don't know if the town wants to add anything, but yeah, there's only going to be the one driveway. I think was there's not going to be an additional driveway.
Correct, and I just wonder if this is a little misleading, because I understand there is the one driveway with ample parking for the front cottage and the back cottage in that existing driveway. So I just was a little concerned this may be a little bit misleading, located on separate parcels.
And maybe it is a term that's too vague, but the intention was so that the lot that's getting its addition doesn't have a driveway that's going to end up going through another property. Correct. So that they have their independent access. Correct. They have their septic wholly on their own parcels, and separate's probably just not the right word.
Right. I didn't want to get tripped up later, when this application flows through, that we're talking about locating parking on separate parcels, because that's really not the case in my view. So as long as Mrs. Hartwig doesn't get tripped up at a later date, just wanted to clarify that. Okay.
Vice Deputy Mayor Huber.
Thank you. I was looking for some confirmation of something too. There's two places where there's mention of septic capacity, and basically says that prior to the lot additions to be made to both parcels, it has to be determined that the septic system on the one lot can accommodate services to the second dwelling unit. And I'm curious to know why that assessment wasn't done first, because if that assessment comes back that septic system can't accommodate both, what does that mean for the application? Is all of this just stopped in its tracks? Because it does say that this can't happen unless that septic system can accommodate both of them. So if we don't know that, if then it's determined that it can't, what does that mean for the application?
Then they would have to improve the septic system in order to accommodate both to allow the lot addition. So they would have to add capacity.
Councillor Minaj.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm trying to understand the comments from the public meeting, and then it's your comments, I believe, after. Tessa, if I can. It says, in response to the comments heard, the proposed bylaw does not put any restrictions on how the second dwelling may be used and assumes continuous occupation. By that, I believe we're talking about the primary dwelling, the existing fully serviced dwelling, not the second dwelling, because then it goes on to say, however, limits have been placed on the second dwelling, brackets cabin. So we've got two things being called second dwelling. Am I correct in that?
No, we were just referring to the cabin in that. We don't want to put any restrictions on the main house. We're really not trying to address it in any way. And in the bylaw, we only refer to any kind of restriction or any provisions in the bylaw only refer to the cabin, not the dwelling currently on 244.
Help me out here, please. I'm reading, the proposed bylaw does not put any restrictions on how the second dwelling may be used and assumes continuous occupation. However, limits have been placed on the second dwelling. So one sentence says there are no restrictions on the second dwelling. The next sentence says there are.
There's restrictions on use, but not in terms of there's no restrictions on use in terms of rental versus family or anything like that. We haven't put any restrictions in terms of the proposed use of the cabin, but we put restrictions in terms of expansion, enlargement, and repairs, renovations.
Thank you very much for the clarification. And further to that, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to ask for a second clarification then. What are those limits? Limits to repairs, expansion, renovations. Where do I read the limits?
So they're in the bylaw,
Okay.
and so we are not allowing any expansion or renovation. As we've worded the bylaw, it's for what exists, like the footprint as it exists on the day of the passing of the bylaw. But the repairs and renovations are the same provisions as those for legal non-conforming buildings in this town. So it would be the same as any legal non-conforming building in terms of you're allowed to do repairs and renovations, and if there's a fire or some thing that happens that destroys the house, you can rebuild in that case, but you wouldn't be allowed to enlarge it or add density or capacity.
I understand. Thank you.
Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Tessa, I have a concern that focuses on that introductory sentence under comments from the public meeting. The fact that the proposed bylaw does not put any restrictions on how the second dwelling may be used and assumes continuous occupation. So as a ward councillor in an area with a large seasonal population and many people have bunkies, some people want to put apartments above their garages so that they can accommodate an overflow of family visitors in the summer or whatever. Our bylaw doesn't allow that to be people to have people sleep in them or give sanitation, give hookups to sewers or even electricity, really. And so anything that would make it habitable. In this case, we're saying, yeah, we know that actually we're setting this up probably to be rented because it says continuous occupation. It's not just a summer family overflow, visitor overflow. And so I have a hard time with saying we're allowing that in this situation, but when people throughout most, Port Elgin or Southampton want to do that, we say no. And what I say is that I think we need, if we feel like this is something that is an important planning discussion matter, we should bring this forward for us to discuss the costs and benefits of this as a perhaps a revised part of our bylaw. If we think that we need to permit this kind of thing so that we have more rental space, then let's look at that as a total issue. I find it very hypocritical for us to say that's okay in this situation, but it's not okay for lots of other people who want to do this. Thanks.
I think just for clarity, the one difference is this is an existing situation that has existed for many, many years down there. And so we're really just recognizing that it has existed, and we have not done anything with it in the past. So I don't disagree with your comments about we have these, if these are important things in our zoning bylaw amendment, then perhaps we need to look at them further. But Councillor Rich.
Thanks through you, Mr. Mayor. So as far as I understand, it's habitable continually right now.
No, it's not. There's no servicing to it currently.
Oh, there's no servicing? I thought that there was, because there was a right-of-way and actually it was for sale for a couple of years there.
No, all the servicing was removed. In 2009, the septic was removed. There'll be no new hookup. It'll just be from the house to the cabin.
The only purpose is just to hook it into the main.
Yeah.
It's more or less habitable. For years it was, right? Like people lived in it for.
I assume so. Yeah, you can like sleep in it now and stuff, but there's no services.
Yeah, it just seems to me as though that there's not really been. All we're doing is just kind of adding it. So that's why I'm going to support it.
Any further comments? Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, a follow-up question then. If this is an exception, I can think of old bunkies in Southampton that have probably existed as long as, or almost as long as this situation. And I believe they're probably being used for overflow sleeping in the summertime, but I guess what I'm asking is if those owners wanted to say, well, we would like to rent out our bunkie to workers who need rental accommodation, they could make a similar application? That's how we'd handle that?
If it's a change of use, or and if they wanted to, if it's illegal now, what they're doing, and if they wanted to make it legal, I mean, I'm speculating here quite a bit, really. If they want, they can make an application to change the use at any time, and it would be before this committee this committee and council.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Deputy Mayor Charbonneau.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The key point is on that. What's true here is probably, in this case, is probably true in most other cases, and that is that us marching around trying to figure out what people are doing inside their buildings is impossible. It's not enforceable. We just don't have the capacity to know whether somebody's living there year-round or living there part-time, and I don't quite frankly think we want to be marching around trying to enforce that either, because it's a little bit too invasive. So I think that's why we don't want to do it here. And if we want to have that discussion about other places, I'm quite open to that too, because it's just more work than this municipality needs to be doing and more regulation than is required. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Any further comments? Then I call the question. All in favor of the recommendation? Opposed? That carries. So the next item on the agenda is zoning bylaw for Wanda Snoblin for 3933 Bruce Road 3. And again, I'll turn it over to our planner, Tessa.
All right, so we'll see if this pointer works any better. The map and the information is up there. So this is another zoning, and it is for a surplus farm dwelling severance. And again, this is a recommendation, a meeting for recommendation, and we've reviewed the policies and the comments. We received a complete application. It's been circulated to agencies and the public. We had the public meeting on December 18th, and we'll send out the notice of decision. So as mentioned, this is a surplus farm dwelling severance. So we would be rezoning the retained lands to agricultural special in order to prohibit future residential development, and the severed lot will be rezoned in order to allow the reduced lot area and frontage for the house severance. The EP zone on the property is to remain unchanged. So that's the site plan for the proposed severance. So it's appropriately configured, the right size to accommodate the house, appropriate setbacks, the garage, and the septic system, without removing any land really from active agricultural production. So we've reviewed the policies, including provincial policies, MDS guidelines, all the necessary county and local policies as well. And based on that, our recommendation is that the zoning bylaw amendment be approved and that council adopt the draft bylaw as prepared. There were no comments received from the public, no objections from circulated agencies, and so our recommendation in this case is again for approval.
Thank you, Tessa. Then the recommendation is that further to the statutory public meeting held December the 18th, 2017, where the application was presented and council members were provided an opportunity to ask questions for clarification. Therefore, staff recommend that zoning bylaw amendment Z-73-17.44 be approved and that the council of the town of Saugeen Shores adopts the draft bylaw attached. Questions, comments? All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. So the next item on the agenda is Barry's Construction. It's a big, long file number. I don't think we need to read that, but Barry's Construction Insulation for 526 Ivan Drive. And I'll turn it off. I think Bruce is going to present. Thanks, Bruce.
Okay, the application, by the way, is 41T-2016-02.46. If you were unsure about that. There is a zoning bylaw amendment, joint application with this, so you'll be considering both the zoning bylaw and the subdivision, the proposed revision to the subdivision. So the details are up there. It's shown there as 526 Ivings Drive. Ivings Drive does go into more or less the center of it, more or less, and provides access back into those lands. So do Bruce Street and a number of other streets that are existing that provide access into these lands. The application is advanced by Barry's Construction, and the map there shows the approximate location, or the location approximately in the town of Port Elgin. This is before council for recommendation tonight after the December 18th information meeting. I'll quickly go through the land use policies and the comments from the public and town and other agencies. So from the town, there were three comments made, specifically addressing some of the particulars of the plan. And one of those was entrances directly onto Bruce Street should be minimized. I spoke to those at the last meeting, and they did a flip, if you will, of one of the blocks in the subdivision to load single detached dwellings onto Bruce Street as opposed to townhouses that reduce the number of driveway entrances and access points onto Bruce Street. They have willingly chose to do that to reduce the number of driveway entrances. Blocks 262 and 263 were to be transmitted to the town, or transferred to the town rather. In the conditions of approval that are attached, or the draft conditions of approval I should say, that are attached to the plan, I had broadly included that to be covered off in our conditions of approval in condition number 3, which speaks to the dedication of road allowances, road widenings, walkways, service corridors, future development blocks, and so on and so forth to the town. But for clarity, I think it's not inappropriate to address those two blocks, 262 and 263, and we can specifically name them to be conveyed to the municipality. So it probably could have been dealt with through condition 3, but for the sake of clarity for all parties involved, including the town, I can add that in, and I'll amend the conditions of approval to do that. There was a request that the developer be informed and of a requirement that they will need to share off-site projects, including Ridge Street and Bruce Road 25 reconstruction as outlined in the development charges background study. That has also been added into the conditions of approval that will go forward for approval with the plan of subdivision. The other agencies, for the most part, had no comments, with the exception of Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority that made us aware of a number of things, including the habitat of endangered and threatened species that may potentially exist on the property. There was an EIS done at one point on the property. The land has essentially been used for farm purposes and things like that over the years as well. It's unlikely that there's anything there, but that has been addressed, and the developer has been made aware that they have some responsibilities regarding that, and will need to deal with the Ministry of Natural Resources to resolve any issues that may arise if things are found as they develop. The application was circulated to the public, and we received one comment letter by email regarding access to the subdivision using Stickle and Andrew Street, both residential street, and essentially the comments were concerned about construction traffic using those streets to access the development land. My feeling on this is that these are public streets that are made to provide access to property, not restricted. Restricting one access will potentially benefit the neighbors or the people that live on that street, but then they will impact somewhere else. So it's a no-win situation for the municipality, really, to do that. On the other hand, the municipality may be able to put load limits or restrictions on certain streets if they feel that there is damage being done to those streets that could be addressed. So at this point in time, and as part of the conditions of approval of the subdivision, I'm not recommending that there be any conditions added for that. There is the subdivision agreement, there are phasing plans and so on for the development of the subdivision that can help to address heavy traffic loads on certain streets and things like that, and distribute it to different areas as the various stages of the subdivision are built out without the need of actually restricting access on public roads. So my feeling is that this need not be a concern, can be dealt with through the subdivision agreement and the phasing plan that the developer brings forward when they wish to develop the lands. So moving then to provincial interest, there isn't a lot there. There's the archaeological issues that exist on most lands, especially along the shoreline and so on in the municipalities here. Natural heritage policies and so on that can be addressed through through environmental impact studies and archaeological assessments. Both of those have been done. Those reports are on file. Moving then on to the county official plan. This is an area that's designated for residential and other uses. The development in our serviced municipalities, we have policies requiring that the minimum density be 15 dwelling units per gross hectare. That is met with this development, and I believe that the density as proposed as a result of the draft approval with this major revision results in a density of 20.6 units per gross hectare, above the minimum, and certainly not excessively dense. The local issues here, the lands are designated for a mixture of residential, or it's designated residential and hazard, so the primary use of the lands is for residential. There was an environmental impact study done that I mentioned that addresses the requirements of the local official plan to consider the natural heritage features on the land. And then it comes down to the zoning bylaw. and there are revisions that are with this application to the bylaw, and those will increase the density, or the lot coverage rather, on some of the lots in the R1 zone, and will be held in an R184 zone, where the lot coverage can go as high as 45% on the lot. Also, there is lot coverage is being dealt with in an R3 zone, which will be shown as R310 in the bylaw and on the schedule for the bylaw. That will increase the lot coverage maximum to 55% lot coverage, and will also reduce the exterior side yard setback to 4.5 meters, consistent with your R1 zone, and reduce rear yard setback from the regular 7.5 meters to 6.75 meters, reduction of 3/4 of a meter over what would normally be required. The only changes to the other zones on the lands now being the there's R1 on the western edge of the property, which isn't within the plan area itself. But then there's an R2-4 zone, an R4-2 zone, and an EP6 zone on the property, and those are not changing except for the area of the zone itself. The provisions in those zones is not changing, just the area. And that is because of some density changes that are occurring on two of the multi-res blocks, and the stormwater management facility is being expanded to address the increased coverage and so on that is proposed in the R1 and R3. In my opinion, the proposed development is consistent with the provincial policy statement, meets the intent of the policies of the County of Bruce official plan and local Saugeen Shores official plan, and will conform to the comprehensive bylaw with the changes that are proposed in the attached draft bylaw. The plan will add 11 more units to the plan than currently exists, raising the number from 507 to 518. Will provide a good mix and range of uses, residential uses, including single detached dwellings, multi-res dwellings in the form of townhouses primarily, and in my opinion is consistent with all the plans and so on, and I recommend that the applications be approved. Now, I'll try to catch up with the slides. We've gone through all those things. We're at the point of decision that hopefully we'll have tonight. Oh, I did not mention and should have that the lapsing date for subsequent phases of the plan, there's been a request to raise that from 3 years to 5 years. This isn't unreasonable. Often these deadlines come up very quickly on developers, and they need to rush to get the first phase approved, and then they need a little bit of time to build out and recover costs and so on and so forth before they come back for subsequent phases, and so they've asked that be extended out to 5 years, which I think is reasonable under the circumstances. And then the various plans. This shows the zoning, how it's changing. In particular, it shows this block over on the right side of the screen here that was flipped to address the number of units accessing Bruce Street, and the recommendation.
Thank you, Bruce. So the recommendation is that the zoning bylaw amendment Z-67-17.46 be approved, and that Council for the Town of Saugeen Shores adopt the draft bylaw attached. That the Council of the Town of Saugeen Shores recommend to the County of Bruce Approval Authority that the proposed major revision of draft plan of subdivision 41T-2016-02.46 be approved with the conditions of draft approval attached. Questions, Councillor Mike Myatt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had a few questions, and perhaps Sue, you too. And I see the developers here this evening, so perhaps Stu may want to answer a few of these, or the planner, but probably the developer, a few of them. I have had a few residents in the area express concern to me, and maybe the developer can answer this one, but about the truck routes, and with 507 units being constructed over 3 to 5 year period. Stuart, I'm just wondering, rather than using that same route for all of the 3 to 5 year period when you're constructing all those units, I mean, there's dirt, there's dust, it can be messy. What's the practice with developer with this size of development over that period of time, to kind of, I guess move that traffic around and share various roads? I know the plan you talked about this evening, but just what's the normal practice, Stuart, in terms of trying to appease those residents the best we can? Because it's going to be a heck of a mess over 3 to 5 years. It's a good thing. It's a great development, and I applaud you for it. But I'm just wondering what measures you typically put in place.
So one thing for clarification is there is 507 or 518 units, but that will be over a lot more than 5 years. The first 5 years will likely only include 60 to 80 units, depending on what the size of phase one and what the town approves for that phase. So in the past, I know the town has done with certain subdivisions, asked the developer to use this road and not this one. What's nice about this particular area is a fairly direct route off Ivings Drive, coming right from the highway. Doesn't have a lot of residential homes. There's commercial, some different higher density residential. So chances are any contractor would likely use that road, and the concern from Mr. Kraft would likely not even be an issue, because we probably wouldn't use that road anyway. But certainly we have no objection to working with the town and in the subdivision agreement and stipulating that, if that would help certain people.
And that would be handled at the subdivision agreement stage. So 2 other questions, if I might, Mr. Mayor. The stormwater retention area, you put in it's a rather nice looking stormwater retention pond area over north of Beaner Park, not fenced, grassed area. Will it be similar to what you'll be looking at with this next phase, like with that kind of a stormwater retention pond area? We're looking at something totally different.
This one will be a little different just because we're having to put quite a bit more water into that area. That's why we ended up losing 3 lots of that south side, to try to get that bigger, and working with the town to make sure the slopes and that type of thing works, would work for them. So no, it probably won't look the same. We'll likely have a bit of fencing on one side, perhaps some other things, but all that has to go through your staff before it's approved, and we move forward, as well as the MOE.
Okay, and I know this is a little bit outside of the plan, Mr. Mayor, but if you bear with me just this last question, and it really is for its future looking out there for trail development. I know it's not part of this development, I understand that. But from Mitchell Lane heading in a southerly direction along the ridge down through north of McKinnon Lane, could you speak a little bit, Stuart, in terms of the future? Even though it's not for this application, I understand that, but what your plans are in terms of trail development in that area?
Yeah, sure. So as part of this subdivision, we have to deal with the stormwater, the overland flow roads, and that goes through another piece of property that we own. And in there, we've been working with town staff, and also met with some of their residents about what that trail will look like in the future. So we do have some work on that. It's not finalized yet. We have to work with your staff and get that done first. But certainly that's in the back of our mind, and also in the draft plan conditions, that we need to work through those with the town.
Excellent. So there have been some discussions. And the parkland dedication for this entire project was dealt with years ago, the 7 acres, correct? For parkland dedication, a long time ago.
There is a large park block there, but when it was approved,
that was dealt with. Thank you. Yep. Thank you.
Okay, Vice Deputy Mayor Huber.
Thank you. My question might be directed towards the development coordinator, Jay. The town's comments in the application were very specific about 2 items, the conveyance of block 262 and 263 to the town, and then a comment very specific about acknowledgement that there were some off-site works coming specifically on Ridge Street and Bruce Road 25 that with the development charges background study and the results of that the developer would be expected to contribute something to that. I noticed that the conditions that were put together for this application do not specifically reference those two items that were on the town's list. Can you just let me know how those get picked up then as the process continues, or should they be in those very specific conditions that are typed out for us to see? Thanks.
I think on the first one related to the transfer of the 2 blocks, I think the county has offered that they would include those, within their conditions. So subject to, good faith effort from them, I don't think it needs to be directed by this council. They can just be added by the county when they're approving it. And on the second issue, I was actually pleased with the draft condition related to the off-site contributions. They outline that the development charges study is to be acknowledged, and that's a progressive step by the approval authority to include those sort of conditions for the town. And I'm assuming they would do the same with Kincardine, because there are certain off-site works in proximity to a number of developments that we want to ensure that all parties are aware of their requirements before they proceed. So we're pleased as staff with that recommended condition, at least the way I read it. If you see something different, I'd be happy to review it. But yeah, sorry, it's condition. Is it 9? Yeah, number 9, and it talks about including the developer's share of certain off-site improvements as outlined in the DC background. I felt it didn't need to express the specific projects, but that they were in the background study, that's sufficient.
Councillor Minaj.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would actually ask that our site plan agreement with staff consider using our collector roads for the purposes of this, and not leave it up to the goodwill of the developer. I'd like it to specify to the developer that you will use Ivings Drive, you will use Bruce Street. Those are designed collector roads. They're sized accordingly, and they've been structured to work very well with this. And I'd like to see the staff consider posting signs. They do it in other communities that say access to this development is by this route, and that the developer be asked to provide the information on a 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper to all of the companies that they sub to, and say this is where we want the traffic to go, and these are the reasons why. If you need reasons, these other roads are smaller residential roads where we've got a lot of seniors and a lot of children that are existing now. When we've got these larger, Lake Ridge Road, Ivings, Bruce Street, we've got larger road access. I think we can put something in the site plan agreement that helps the neighbors understand that we are making an effort when the developer's making it with us. Thank you.
Thanks for those comments. I think our staff can easily come to some arrangement with that in the site plan. Do you want to speak to it, Jane?
Maybe if it's worth it, we can expand on our nuisance clause in our standard agreement and ensure that other nuisances such as construction traffic need to be managed by the town, and we'll work with the developer to come up with the optimum routes.
Okay. Any further comments? Oh, Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have 2 things. First of all, I just wanted to applaud the inclusion of the notice and warning clauses in the conditions of draft approval. For instance, telling people about the wind turbine at the Unifor and making sure they understand that, and the possible park lights and activity, and I think those are good inclusions. I have a question that maybe Amanda might be able to answer, and that's how this development would impact the Bruce Road 3325 improvements, and specifically the effect that it might have on the stormwater outlet, which is, I think, being proposed down at the Gobles Grove Beach.
So these lands were part of the study area for the master plan for 25 and 33, but as Stuart spoke to, these lands have their own stormwater management pond and outlet that is not to the one that's going to be through the CAW road works that are going to happen this year. This is through their own outlet. At the public meeting, we talked about how it goes down the hill through the old tobacco ponds and then through an existing outlet where the culvert is the restricting piece. And so no additional flows from the existing condition are going from this subdivision down to the beach.
Any further questions? Then the question, all in favor? Opposed, if any, that's carried. So the next item on the agenda is the Moss Farm rental in care of Jerry Moss at 533 Bricker Street, and I believe Tessa is going to present.
All right, so yeah, as mentioned, this is another zoning application, and there is a associated severance application as well with this proposal. And so it is on Bricker Street and at the corner of Bricker and Emma, and you've got the map up there. So again, this is a meeting for a recommendation on the bylaw amendment application, and we've considered the land use policies and the comments received. So just quickly in terms of the policies reviewed, we have reviewed, so we reviewed all the land use policies in terms of the official plan and zoning, and all the comments received. Just a note in terms of the comments of the public meeting on December 18th, there was some suggestion of looking into office residential or core commercial designations on this property. And as part of this application, the applicant was not interested in doing an official plan amendment, which would involve changing those designations. So we've kept with the proposal as is for the residential lot, as well as the changed institutional zoning. So just a recap. This is in order to facilitate a severance. I'll just bring it up. A severance of the lot, which would have a 5-unit townhouse building on the one side and the existing church building on the other. And the institutional zone, we're recommending adding some neighborhood commercial uses. Now, we have recommended that 2 of the proposed uses not be allowed on this particular site. The 2 that we are recommending be removed from consideration be the restaurant and convenience store uses. Due to parking requirements, frequency of deliveries, frequency of customer turnover, those were the main considerations in removing those 2 uses. We deemed, as a planning department, we deemed that they would be incompatible with the neighboring residences. But we do recommend that the food store, personal service shop, and office uses be allowed in the institutional zone as proposed. And I've spoken with Jerry Moss about this, and he's accepting of these changes and of the recommendation as proposed. So it has been circulated, and we will be at the decision. Just in terms of what's being asked of here, there are changes being proposed to both properties, and we are looking at reduced setbacks for both. Some of the setbacks are recognizing the existing setbacks, especially the church building has a deficient front yard and side yard setback, and then it would also be recognizing the reduced side yard and front yard setbacks on the new residential building. The bylaw has been worded to have Emma Street as the proposed frontage for calculating those setbacks. Typically in the bylaw, the shorter of the 2 lot lines is the front yard, but due to the configuration of the proposed townhouse, it was deemed that it would be more appropriate to recognize Emma as the front yard for calculating the setbacks in this case. The other change is just the reduced parking requirement for the existing church. So they have 6 parking lots through this 6 parking spots through this proposal. So that would be the reduced parking requirement they've asked for 6 spaces, as opposed to the required 11 for the institutional zone. In terms of comments received from the town and from circulated agencies, there were no major Objections raised. There was one comment from the public which was discussed at the previous meeting, and the developer of the townhouse has written a letter to them, and we'll continue to work with them through the consent process to make sure they're satisfied with any fencing or any other things that might be needed along the property with 660 Emma right here. So we'll continue working with them and make sure that their issues have been addressed, which mostly had to do with timelines and fencing. In terms of the town comments, most of their comments can be addressed through site plan control and through the conditions of consent. There was one correction that Mr. Moss asked that I make, and that's in the town comments. That it stated that they use Emma Street for access. As mentioned in the previous meeting, they are currently using the alleyway for access and have been for some time. So that wouldn't be changed, but in terms of improving that access, those are things that can be dealt with through site plan control. There are no natural heritage issues on the property, and no other objections received from other agencies. So at this time, we are recommending that the zoning bylaw amendment be approved and that council adopt the draft bylaw as prepared.
Thank you, Tessa. So further to the statutory public meeting held December the 18th, 2017, where the application was presented, and council members were provided an opportunity to ask questions for clarification. Therefore, staff recommended that the zoning bylaw amendment Z-75-17.44 be approved, and that the council of the town of Saugeen Shores adopt the draft bylaw attached. Comments? Vice Deputy Mayor Huber.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't see any reason to keep restaurant and convenience store as possibilities off the list. A convenience store and a food store are pretty much the same thing, first of all. But a restaurant, there are a couple of examples in Saugeen Shores of restaurants that have gone into more residential areas and they've been just fine. And certainly, that's an area of entrepreneurial interest that we should be providing some opportunities close to downtown, but in slightly unique kinds of environments. So I would, like to see that those proposed uses stay as possibilities, particularly because, I don't know how you would distinguish between a food store and a convenience store these days, because is the independent and Foodland not just convenience stores but just with bigger foot size or bigger floor space. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Charbonneau.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with the Vice Deputy Mayor. I'm a little confused, frankly, by the recommendation because, and the planner can correct me if I'm wrong, but the whole rest of the block is zoned core commercial 3, except for this one spot which is institutional. And so anywhere else on the whole block, you could build a restaurant or have a convenience store, except for this one block. So we're talking about actually perpetuating a difference rather than making them all the same. We could pass this bylaw today, and then tomorrow the neighbor could build a restaurant. That's very confusing. It doesn't make sense. So I think there's no reason why we shouldn't have a restaurant or convenience store there, because you could build it anywhere else on the whole block. So I think that we should. If it's not ideal to go the whole hog and just zone this lot core commercial 3 like the whole rest of the block, then we should at least make it as much similar to the rest of the block as we can, and in which case I think we should include a restaurant or convenience store in that location just like everywhere else. And I also think that, just speaking on a matter of general principle with regard to buildings like this church building, we need to give more options to people to be able to do things in these buildings, or they'll become derelict buildings. Because it's, I've owned one of these buildings, and there's not a lot you can do with them. Like they're very difficult to develop or to put uses into. The Mosses have been very lucky, I think, to get the food bank in there, and hopefully that use stays. I think that's a good use, but we got to give more options to them so that people can do things with them, or they'll become just empty, derelict buildings. So let's put restaurant and convenience store back in there and pass this thing the way that the applicant originally asked for. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Minaj.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. As I stated before, I'm not in agreement with that. and the reason being is that it shouldn't be core commercial anymore. It's an archaic piece of leftover legislation from the town of Port Elgin, and I was on that council at that time, and before me, when the decision was made that the town of Port Elgin was running out of space to develop. It didn't have any new space, so it started to look at one block off Main Street, and it said we could do a rezoning and we could do a core commercial zone one block off Main Street. It doesn't apply today, and in fact it doesn't apply in that area, with the exception of the old high school that was turned into something. It's been turned into a variety of things. The rest of the surrounding area is residential. And so, let's speak to. I asked that we put a corner store in Stu Doyle's development in a commercial lot. And this council could have laughed at the idea, the notion, and said, well, why would we want a corner store in the middle of a residential area? And here we are, some members of council are now saying, hey, it's a good idea to put a corner store in the middle of residential. So on the one hand, it's not, and on the other hand, it is. This is an institutional zone, and we need to have some side traffic discussion on what institutional zones should be, the permitted uses should be in the future. I think there's plenty of opportunity with the existing institutional zone of inclusivity. It could be offices, it could be a number of things. Does it need to be a corner store, or does it need to be a restaurant? In this location, in the downtown Port Elgin area, which is trying very hard to brand itself and have restaurants on its main street, and here we're going to say, in this particular case, it's okay to start branching out and allowing other uses. I think that there's a time and a place for this, and I don't think this is the time or the place. Thank you.
Well, any further comments?
Mayor, I'd written down remove a restaurant. I don't want to prolong this too much longer, but Tessa, just explain to me one more time why again was the reasoning for removing it? You probably said it, but I just need to be refreshed.
So the considerations were when parking requirements, it's not in the core commercial, there's only 6 parking spaces. It could end up with there's 20 required spaces for a typical restaurant outside of the core commercial, which it's right on the edge, but it was one consideration. The other was hours. Typically restaurants would be open late. There are, neighboring residences here, so we were looking at uses that would be more daytime hours. And the other one was frequency in terms of turnover of people driving up and coming in, and frequency of deliveries and that sort of thing. So we felt that the 3 permitted uses as proposed were more kind of 9 to 5 uses, less volume in terms of customer turnover and that sort of thing, and then fewer deliveries and that.
And was this the restaurant question with Mr. Moss? Were they bent on? Seeing one of the developers here this evening, but was this a high priority to have it left in or take out?
No, we just
Just in it, the ones that were left out in terms of neighborhood commercial are things like automobile type uses or dry cleaners. So they added most of the neighborhood commercial uses except for ones that were really inappropriate.
So you mentioned the requirement is 20 parking spots. Is that what you mentioned?
For a restaurant, yes, outside of
and
the core commercial.
Right now there's space approximately 6. Did you hear that?
Yeah.
So if in fact restaurants were left in, where would the balance the parking go on the street? I guess.
Yeah, or on lots in the core commercial and walk or something. But there's not a lot of on-site parking.
Any further questions? I get a motion to amend. Deputy Mayor Charbonneau.
I'll make the motion to amend to add back in the residential or the restaurant and I'm actually looking at the page, the 2 uses that were removed. Restaurant and convenience store.
Convenience and restaurant. Food store was included. Yep. Seconded by Vice Deputy Mayor Huber. So I guess we vote on any further discussion. Vote on the amendment. All in favor of the amendment. Opposed? That carries. Then go back to the main recommendation. All in favor of the recommendation. Opposed? That carries. So the next item on the agenda then is, staff report with dealing with pre-servicing agreement with Red Hawk Construction Limited and our manager of development services. Jay will present.
I don't have much to say other than I guess that you've seen this before. This is probably the third time. It's to facilitate development in a timely and efficient manner while saving the developers significant costs. And I just want to highlight that in this particular development, it's sort of, I guess I can't overstress the importance of making sure that they can do this in a cost-effective manner. So by keeping the securities low, because they will have installed about $5 million worth of infrastructure before they can get a single dwelling permit. So it's important that if we want development to proceed here, that we can support the development, and we feel the agreement does that.
Thank you, Jay. So the recommendation is that Council pass a bylaw to enter into a pre-servicing agreement with Red Hawk Construction Company Limited for Phase 1 of Westlink Subdivision Internal Works. Questions? Councillor Mike Myatt.
Is it a comment, Mr. Mayor? I've declared conflict in the past, but I was not employed there any longer. Wasn't fired. I just decided not to return this year. But so I want to speak to this. I haven't had the opportunity, and I just wanted to congratulate Rod Rice, and I see Brad Mercer's here this evening from Red Hawk. And this is a development, Mr. Mayor, that is just amazing for our community. And you know, the fact we're looking at close to $5 million before a resident moves in is significant. And so I just wanted to commend the developers for bringing something into this community that is just a tremendous initiative. And I'm just wondering, Mr. Mayor, if I can ask you a quick question. The bridge work that's happening, I understand they've sped that up, and we're looking at mid-February commencement date for that project, and through the county, and what's the completion again? Right, is it around the end of
before June?
The end of mobilization, I think, is to begin in the first week in February, right. And completion at the end of May.
And Mr. Mayor, just maybe it's a little bit off topic, but the reasoning why there is no detour signs, to indicate to people that bridge is closed down. Could you just explain to me again why there would be no detour signs around the area? Or Jay, could you explain thank you.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So when you detour on a county road, you can only detour onto county roads. So the detour that, if they were going to post a detour, would have to go County Road 3 or back to County Road 40. So they are putting alternate route signs up, and will redirect down 1314. So those are mostly for vehicles. So delivery trucks are the ones that they don't want to post the detour for, because that makes it difficult. Because pedestrian or passenger vehicles think they have to take those detours. So we're in support of this idea, because 1314 in the spring can get soggy. So we don't want to necessarily always have a detour posted that will take 1314. We want the ability to move it down to Harry Teedy to get to 6 when we need that to happen because of the conditions of our road. So there will be signs telling people how to get around the closed bridge. They just won't be posted as official detours.
Okay, Amanda, thanks for that explanation. Appreciate it.
Any further questions? All in favor of the recommendation? Opposed to any? That's carried. So I believe that is the end of our agenda. And with that, I have a motion to move by Councillor Grace, seconded by Councillor Dave Myatt, that this Planning Committee meeting of January the 15th, 2018 hereby adjourn at 8:35 p.m. All in favor? Thank you. We're adjourned.